Hey everybody, it's Emily at Arc Schooling, and today I'm going to be doing some recommendations for coming-of-age horror. So I don't know about you, but when I think about cozy reading, I tend to want to read coming-of-age stories, and coming-of-age horror specifically is my favorite kind of coming-of-age story. So I kind of mentioned in passing in my last book club live that I wanted to spend my November, December immersing myself in coming-of-age horror. And somebody asked me for recommendations. And of course, in the moment, I can never think of anything in the moment. So I was like, let me come back to it. Maybe I'll make a video. So here we go. This is the video. So coming of age horror is exactly what it sounds like. It is a story about children typically, sometimes teenagers, who are in the midst of something that causes them to grow up, that causes some kind of like loss of innocence or change that moves them closer to adulthood. And coming of age horror does that through something horrific. So to start with, I cannot talk about coming of age horror and not talk about Stephen King because he's kind of the master of this. That's where my love for it came from. My very first foray into that would be The Shining, It, Wendy's Button Box is another great example of a coming-of-age horror novel. The Institute. Stephen King does best when he's writing a group of kids dealing with something awful. So, it is probably his best, his master class, if you will, in coming-of-age horror, where we're following a group of children who are on the brink of becoming teenagers, which will take them into adulthood, and they are dealing with their fears, and they are dealing with bullies, and they're dealing with horrible things in their own lives, whether it's grief or abuse, and it's just perfection. So, you get that vibe from a lot of his books. Like I said, The Shining is a great example if you're following Danny Torrance's storyline. The Body is a novella in different seasons, and I think they've actually separated these out, each of those stories, into individual novellas, but The Body is such a good one. It's the movie Stand By Me is based on that. So it's a group of boys who are searching for a dead body, but it's about them and the adventure of that, and each of them coming to terms with something on the way. Such good stuff. So Stephen King, if you want amazing coming-of-age horror, start there. But he, of course, is not the only one who does this well. His son, Joe Hill, has written what I think is some of my absolute favorite, some of the very best coming-of-age stories, and that would be the Lock and Key series. If you have never read this, oh my god, you're in for a treat. It is one of my favorite things. It's one of my favorite stories. This is a series of graphic novels about the Locke family who, after the death of their father, are moving back to his hometown. They've inherited his house, which is this huge mansion on the coast in Massachusetts, and the story is about them kind of discovering the magic and the mystery of the house itself, and what happened to his father and his group of friends when they were teenagers. It's so good. It's so good. There's a TV show based on it, which is also really fun, but not as good as the graphic novel. The graphic novels are just excellent. Such a great story on its own. It's heartwarming. It's devastating. It's just a really riveting story about magic and keys, all these different keys that do different things. You can unlock a key that opens your memories. You can open a door with a key that turns you into a ghost. There's so many cool ideas in the series. So it's a lot of fun, and it's a great coming of age. You're following the siblings, the Locke siblings, who are teenagers, but there's also one who's really young, Brody, who really goes through the stories, and they're just so good. For something a little bit different, a lot of coming of age stories tend to focus around boys, but there are some really good ones about girls. Like My Best Friend's Exorcism by Grady Hendrix. One of my absolute favorite books ever, my favorite Grady Hendrix book. This is a story about best friends and what happens when that friendship starts to break down. That is essentially the plot of the book. The friendship is falling apart, and is it because she's possessed, or is it because she's just not happy with the friendship anymore? And that's the real world concept, is maybe this is just a friendship going wrong. Maybe something happened between them. But of course, it's Grady Hendrix. It's horror, so it's a demon possession. And this is great because at its core, it's a story about fighting for that friendship. Being so in love with your best friend that you can't let it go. You have to do what you must to make her love you back again. It's such a good story, and it's so full of great 80s references. All the chapter titles are named after 80s songs, and just it's very nostalgic, which is, I think, another aspect of coming of age that really resonates with a lot of people, is the nostalgia factor. When I read it, I wasn't feeling nostalgia for the 1950s or 60s, whenever this is set, but it still had that feeling of nostalgia in it. And obviously I wasn't a teenager in the 80s, but I get a lot of the references, so for me it's a little bit nostalgic reading it, so that's definitely an aspect, I think. But it's also just a really good story. Another teenage girl friendship book is Undead Girl Gang by Lily Anderson. I really enjoyed this one. This is another teenage girl friendship story, but in this one, what if your best friend dies and you are both practicing witches and you think you might be able to bring her back? Well, what if you bring her back, but you also accidentally bring back the mean girls that died with her? And what if they were actually zombies? So they're rotting corpses, but they're also still there as themselves too. What happens in this scenario and how do you fix it? That's the essence of what this book is. It is so good. It does a lot of the same things that Grady Hendrix does here, but in a very different way. And I love how it addresses bullying. This book is so good and so much fun. I had a blast reading this. It's contemporary, so it isn't nostalgic necessarily, unless you're thinking about nostalgia for when you were a teenager and what that was like and that sort of thing. I don't know. But this is definitely a really great story about witches and magic gone wrong, and a coven trying to help fix it after you've made a huge mess. But also it deals a lot with grief and learning to let go, and a girl trying to prove that her best friend would never have killed herself, that it was actually a murder, and desperately trying to prove her innocence to a world that just won't listen. So I love that aspect of the story. Again, that is a big element here too. Nobody believes her, and she has to fight against all these adults in her life who are trying to tell her to just let it go. So I don't know. I think that's another big aspect of coming of age too, is adults just trying to meddle in it and telling you to just sit down and stop when you're right. Another different kind of coming of age story is A Headful of Ghosts by Paul Tremblay. This one is also about possession, but in this case, you're following two sisters, and the older sister is going through something that the parents think seems a little bit like it could be possession. But instead of going to get her an exorcism and getting real help, they enlist a crew of reality TV people to come in and turn this into a television spectacle. And the obviously horrible way this is gonna go, and the aftermath of it. So you're following two different timelines, and you're unraveling what actually happened here. This is a story about sisters, like I said, and a sister relationship and how that falls apart. And this is one of those ambiguous books where you're never really sure what actually was going on until the very end, but even then it's still open to interpretation, and I love that. So this is a sibling coming-of-age story. Then another one I want to recommend is We Have Always Lived in the Castle by Shirley Jackson. This is a classic, and what I love about this one is that you are following a very unreliable narrator, in that Mary Cat is not what she seems to be, or is she? She's grown up in this like castle on a hill, in the town does not like them. Her family has all died except for a sister and her uncle, I think. It's been a while since I read it. And like, nobody knows exactly what happened, but they think they know, and you're kind of trying to figure out throughout the book, like, what actually happened here? Who was at fault? And like, it's just a really great story, and not your typical coming-of-age story, but it's a classic for a reason. Shirley Jackson was brilliant, and like, this story is just so good and so interesting. And I just love Mary Cat as a character. I think she's fascinating, and like what she's going through and how she reacts to the world, and I don't know, I think it's great. And then my last recommendation is probably my weirdest, and that is The Girl with All the Gifts by M.R. Carey. This is a zombie book, but we're following what appears to be a group of children who are in this like institutional setting, and they have classes that they go to and a teacher and all of that stuff. But what's really happening here? Why are they in this facility? We know that there's some kind of an outbreak. We know that they are maybe the only people left alive. We're not really sure. And that's where the story goes. I don't want to tell you too much about this because I feel like the reveals in this book are really, really interesting. And the less you know going in, the better. But this book is very plot twisty. If you start the book and you think you know what's happening, you don't. It's gonna go in a different direction than you think it is. But it's so good. And we're following Melanie, who is our protagonist, and she is one of the students in this institutional setting, and we only know what she knows, and she doesn't know exactly what's happening or why she's there or what has happened to the world. So it's another unreliable narrator kind of a situation where you're just following her along and exploring the world with her. Has she always been here? Was she born into this setting? She doesn't know, and she doesn't remember. So you're kind of figuring it out with her, and I think that's a really great way to tell the story. Just sort of exploring right along with your character and discovering all this, what the reality of the situation really is. So those are some of my favorite books in the coming-of-age horror genre. I would love to know if this is a genre that you love. Let me know in the comments. I want some recommendations. This is definitely a genre that I want to read more of, that I keep saying I'm going to explore more, but like I haven't for a really long time picked something up specifically because I wanted to read that. That is what I'm going to be doing the rest of this month and into December. Actually, I'm going to be doing another Sadie Hartman Made Me Read kind of a video where I read books that were recommended in her 101 Horror Novels to Read Before You're Murdered book. So I am going to be reading a lot of coming-of-age horror in the next coming weeks, which I'm very excited about. So give me some recommendations if you have any. I hope you enjoyed the recommendations that I gave you in this video today. And yeah, thanks so much for watching. If you liked this video and you want to see more, make sure you subscribe and give it a like. And I will see you guys in my next video. Happy reading. Bye.